Okay, here we are. So, welcome everybody to this live webinar organized by the Swiss Healthcare Licensing Group. Today we have two great speakers, and with me, I'm Francesca Lianza. I'm part of the board of the Swiss Healthcare Licensing Group, and with me, part of the board, we have Jean-Marc Sequier, and also the two great speakers, Jasper and Sunil. Odell is also our assistant of the Swiss HLG. She will help you in case you have issues to access the webinar. Today, we are going to talk about expanding your funding and partnership toolkit. And let me go to the next slide and show you what is the agenda of today. So you will have a short presentation of who we are, so the Swiss Healthcare Licensing Association. Then Sunil will talk about Sovereign Capital Partnership. Jasper will introduce us to the royalty financing in life science, and then you will have the Q&A session, moderated by Jean-Marc. So welcome again. Here is a little bit a picture of the last conference that was held in Montreux. And let me introduce the Swiss Healthcare Licensing Group. We are a non-profit association, and we are a group, a community of biopharma deal-making professionals. So our goal is really to provide a unique, inspiring environment for a community, for a group of deal-maker business people. And we try to put together this community in order for us to share best practice, make networking, building a business relationship, and have a great community and time together. We offer to our member a lot of benefits. First, the flagship annual conference. As you can see, this year we have a great title, Partnering on Parish. This is really good for the today situation. And this will be in Montreux again this year from the 10th to the 12th of May 2026. We really recommend to join and to listen to the great speakers will be at the conference. Furthermore, we have for our members, we have this virtual conference. This is an example, but we have also local networking events. This year, we will have a networking event on the 1st of April in the Romandy, part of Switzerland. So check on our website. It's also open to non-member. They may have to pay a little fee to join. And also we will have another face-to-face networking event organized in Basel end of November. Again, check our website, www.swisshlg.com. We are a community also to build up, to help the community of deal maker to make it better. And therefore, we organized and we made some videos and booklet on the Good Partnering initiative. And this is really to help the community to accept the principle, the terms, and the processes to facilitate the successful deal making. Another important initiative I will talk later is a startup initiative, a series of workshops. We wanted to boost our community of startups also in Switzerland and near Switzerland, really to offer them these free of charge workshops. And then we have the LinkedIn community and also access to the International Pharma Licensing Community platform. So join us as member, you will have a lot of benefits. This is again a picture of our flagship conference in Montreux. You see a great and amazing location. So really to refresh your mind and to have a lot of insights. Again, if you want to register, please go on our website. It's a great event. Regarding the Swiss HLG Startup Initiative Workshop in 2026 is organized in collaboration with J&J and Base Launch, and all the startups that are in early stage phase, or let's say seeding phase and so on, they can clearly participate and benefit out of this workshop, which is free of charge again. And as I said, you will have an amazing kind of takeaway from the four workshops. LinkedIn, we have our community. We are active there, and also there you can receive really, really interesting information around the market, what's going on, and be part of a very great community. All this would not be possible without our supporters. So a big thank to all of them for their help, for their support, continuous support. Most of them, they are continuing to be support of us, which is great, means that we are doing a very great job. And again, thank you to everybody. So with that, let me thank you again for being here and turn it over to Jean-Marc, who will moderate, introduce you the speakers, and moderate the Q&A session. Remember, Q&A session will be held at the end of the meeting today. Jean-Marc, please.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for the introduction of our association, and welcome everybody to this webinar. So we're going to be starting with Sunil. Sunil is a Chief Investment Officer at Arcera. That means he's responsible for business development, any kind of partnerships and M&A activities. But before that, he was an executive director in the healthcare and life science at ADQ. And we're going to be hearing more ADQ, which is a sovereign fund. And it's really thanks to Sunil, with his experience in sovereign funds, that as an association, we said, oh, maybe we should be talking a bit more about these sovereign funds in the life science. We talk a lot about venture capital and private equity, but very rarely on the sovereign fund. So that's a great opportunity that we've got Sunil today to talk about that. But beyond that, I mean, Sunil is a certified Canadian chartered accountant, but has also an MBA from the London Business School. So he's got a great experience in finance and in business development. And as I said, his experience in sovereign funds is very valuable for us. So Sunil, the stage is for you. Thanks. Next slide.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Francesca, thank you for inviting me to the Swiss HLG webinar. I'm really honored to be here, so thank you. I thought today I'd just talk to you a little bit about how sovereign wealth funds are impacting life sciences. You might not think, when you think about sovereign capital, that, the money that they obviously administer goes towards building healthcare and life science, but they're actually doing a lot. So that'll be one thing I'd like to talk to you about. We'll also talk a little bit about how sovereign capital is different from traditional capital, kind of what are the pros and the cons. And then what I thought I'd do is also give you 2 live case studies from the region. Obviously, I'm here in the GCC, so my experience is very much around Gulf sovereign wealth funds, and I'd be happy to talk about kind of 2 real-life case studies. So if we move on to the next slide. So when we think about sovereign wealth funds, what are sovereign wealth funds to start off with? These are state-owned investment funds. They generally manage national savings. Their mandate is to generate long-term financial returns. But more than that, they also support economic stability and future generations for the particular country. Here you've got a kind of a snapshot of the let's call it the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world. The Sovereign Fund of Norway, for example, is the biggest globally. But if you look at the Gulf sovereigns, so ADQ, Mubadala, ADIA, PIF, which is the Sovereign Fund of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, together they punch well above their weight. So they represent about 40% of global sovereign wealth fund assets. And they deployed over about $58 billion of investments in 2024. So that's quite a bit of capital, obviously across many different industries, including healthcare and life sciences. But when you zone in on healthcare and life sciences, it's interesting to note that some of these sovereigns are mainly sort of financial investors in the sector, and they take a passive role. They deploy capital across public companies, private companies. They may allocate capital to private equity funds. They may co-invest with private equity funds, but some of them generally take a more of a minority or passive role. And some sovereign wealth funds are creating strategic life science and healthcare platforms, where they're building infrastructure in healthcare and life science for this generation and for future generations. For example, I work for Arcera, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We are the life science platform of ADQ Limad. Mubadala, for example, has a life science platform called Mubadala Bio in M42. The sovereign fund of Saudi Arabia, PIF, has a platform that they've built around national resilience called Lifera. So interesting how these different sovereign funds tend to invest and build sort of healthcare and life science. So if we move to the next slide. So the big question is why partner with sovereign wealth funds to begin with? For me, I think there's maybe 6 key reasons. The first one is there's a real focus on healthcare and life science. Healthcare in general is a priority in many countries, as we know. There's rising disease prevalence, particularly in diabetes, oncology, rare disease. So this obviously is a burning issue. It eats into budgets of countries. It impacts GDP, etc. So luckily, we work in a sector that's very, very important and very topical to sovereign funds. The second reason is that sovereign funds, being part of the country infrastructure, they tend to have good access to decision makers. So in the UAE, for example, the sovereign funds are quite close to the regulators, the policymakers, and healthcare authorities. And they're able to accelerate market entry and also decision making when it comes to investments in life sciences. The third reason is that they have a commercial mindset. Now, there may be a perception that sovereign funds don't have a kind of return on capital threshold because it's sovereign money, but they actually do have a very much a commercial mindset. They've been mandated they're the stewards of the country's capital, so they do have to generate a return on investment. But they also focus on scalable platforms. So you'll see later that it's not really a single asset by asset investment. They're really thinking about building long-term scalable platforms. The fourth reason is that they provide a gateway to in-country expansion and foreign direct investment. So sovereign funds are really incentivized to bring in foreign investment, but also not only investment, but also to attract intellectual property, manufacturing capability, and R&D. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of what Abu Dhabi is doing in particular around that. They also are long duration capital, which is kind of nice, especially in our industry where we know it takes quite long to develop a new medicine all the way to commercialization can be a very long timeline. Obviously, with the advent of AI and technology, this could speed up. But the nice thing is that sovereign funds are aligned to long-term, long horizon investing. So they don't necessarily have an exit mandate per se, as would a traditional VC or private equity fund. And then the last reason I would say is that they're also a platform for regional and global scaling. So a lot of these countries have built quite interesting infrastructure around healthcare and life science, both from logistics, free zones. They provide tax advantages. They provide other types of incentives that allow companies to come and set up here. What I'm seeing recently, and I've been in the region for about 15 years now, is that particularly in the last, I'd say, 3 to 5 years, there's been an acceleration of more life science and healthcare companies setting up in the region and taking advantage of the things that I mentioned. Moving on. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about a real life example of an ecosystem, a life science ecosystem that's being built by Abu Dhabi. It's an ecosystem called Helm. It was kind of launched at the Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week in 2025. And what it really is, it brings together sort of research and clinical institutions. It brings together biotech and health technology companies. It obviously brings together sovereign investment capital and advanced regulatory frameworks. So it's spearheaded by a number of constituents, being the Department of Economy, ADIO, which is sort of a kind of an Abu Dhabi investment office, which helps companies set up here in Abu Dhabi. The MBZ-UAI, which is an education research university institute that promotes the development and research of AI solutions. Hub 71, which is like a platform that encourages startups, and obviously the Department of Health, which is the health regulator. So they've nicely kind of put all of this together in an ecosystem, and they're driving the agenda of effectively building a life science ecosystem here in the UAE. They also have kind of defined objectives, sort of numerical financial objectives, if you would call it that. By 2045, they want this ecosystem to bring in 25 billion of GDP. They have an investment target of attracting about $11 billion of investment capital. And of course, they want to create employment, and the target is to create 30,000 high-value jobs by 2045. So this is something that's really being pushed quite heavily by the UAE, and it's also supported by the leadership of the country. If we move to the next slide, you'll see here, which I think it kind of nicely lays out, what is Helm as an ecosystem trying to achieve. I think the number one objective is long-term objective, again, is to build an integrated healthcare life science hub, which intersects science and technology. So it's really to create this life science hub, call it similar to Singapore, Boston, et cetera, et cetera. So the ambitions are quite high. And I'll show you on the next slide in a second that there are some components of that exist today, and there's some that are obviously need to be developed. One of the other objectives of Helm is to establish a world-leading genomics oasis. So you may know that the UAE is one of the few countries that's instituted a genomics program. So it's called the Emirati Genomics Program. It's effectively sequenced the DNA of maybe now, I think, almost 900,000 Emirati citizens. So it's a quite valuable, I'd call it a database. And around that database, one can really, spearhead personalized medicine, build advanced therapeutics, or actually tackle, very specific rare genetic diseases, as an example. One of the other objectives is to build sort of a digital ecosystem. So there's a heavy focus on digital medicine and AI. Both through research institutions, but also through investments. So you're going to see, more AI investments through academia, but also in industry. Obviously, in our industry, there's a lot that can be done in AI, both through drug discovery, but also, implementing AI throughout the value chain, including manufacturing processes, commercial operations, etc. The fourth objective is to really create a hub for advanced therapies. So the UAE is really trying to promote through Helm things like cell and gene therapy, for example. They're really focused on certain diseases. I'd say more kind of metabolic and cardiovascular conditions, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, obviously. And so they really are looking to attract innovation, talent, new molecules in those therapies. And that's again something that is being heavily kind of promoted by the different constituents in Abu Dhabi. And then finally, in terms of sort of building kind of resilience in manufacturing and infrastructure, there is a desire to bring more kind of manufacturing, complex manufacturing capabilities, and also supply of innovative medicines. If we move to the next slide, this gives you a little bit of a snapshot around kind of what exists today. So if you look at the top, if you go from sort of basic research all the way to healthcare delivery, there are companies and institutes in the UAE that do kind of play in all of these different types of verticals. I think the overall theme is that when it comes to basic research and translational research and clinical development, I would say that's still underdeveloped in a place like the UAE and Abu Dhabi. There's more maturity when it comes to obviously healthcare delivery, which is, hospitals and clinics, supply chain in terms of, all of the logistics, distribution capabilities, free zones, all of that is quite in abundant supply and is quite mature. And manufacturing, I say, is another area where, there is some, I'd call it maybe basic manufacturing, but more complex manufacturing still to be brought into the country. So I think this picture will develop over time, particularly as Helm executes on its mandate. So that was a little bit of a snapshot of the UAE. If we move on to a couple of case studies, I work at Arcera. Arcera is the life science arm of ADQ. The purpose and the mission of Arcera is to build a leading global life science company to enable longer and healthier lives, but at the same time creating sustainable value. So, today we're quite an international company, but the objective is to be, in the future, a leading global life science company. The main sort of imperatives of Arcera are to drive value, and that's through value creation initiatives across the different companies that have been integrated into Arcera, but also to bring more innovation across science, commercial, and manufacturing. One of the key drivers of Arcera is also to continue to grow the business organically. So, to continue to strengthen its business in the life science segments where it operates, and also to launch new products. And then finally, I think in terms of how does the business scale, that would be through a keen focus on M&A, but also business development and developing sort of long-term partnerships. You'll see there at the bottom some of the partnerships that at Arcera we're already part of. A little bit of a deep dive on the business today. You see that interestingly, this business, which was sort of created by a sovereign fund, is a very international business. So we operate in over 120 countries today. We have quite a diverse footprint in Latin America, Africa, all of the Middle East and GCC, Egypt, and Ukraine and surrounding countries. So effectively, the business is call it a commercial life science business. It has sort of end-to-end capabilities in all of these markets, from regulatory, medical, supply chain, and commercial capabilities. And the mission now really is to bring more innovative products into the business and to launch those in the markets where we operate. So that's a little bit of an example of how a sovereign fund has created an international life science company with a very good footprint and become a much bigger global life science company. And then I would also say that being here in the UAE, we very much have a connection to the mandate of Helm, which I talked about earlier. So we work quite closely with the Helm constituents on bringing and developing the life science ecosystem here in the UAE. I thought I'd also give you a little bit of an example of what's happening outside the UAE. So if we go to the next slide, here's an example of what Saudi Arabia is doing. For example, they set up a platform called Lifera, which has really an agenda to build a kind of a national manufacturing, I'd say, footprint to secure kind of local biopharma resilience and also enable their sort of strategy. So, they've taken an approach of building, I'd say, kind of more an infrastructure heavy type program where they're actually building state-of-the-art biomanufacturing capacity in the country. They've secured kind of commercial partnerships with Novo Nordisk, for example, to locally manufacture insulin. And they're also, they're working with Sanofi on localizing vaccine manufacturing. And then their strategy is also then to move more down the value chain into clinical trials and a little bit around precision medicine and genomics. So you can see here, this is a platform that's really been built around sort of call it, national resilience, security around critical medicines, but also, trying to move more into the higher value part of life sciences. So that's really it. I hope I gave you a good overview of what's happening with sovereign funds, and I'm happy to take any other questions at the end of the session.
Well, thanks very much, Sunil, for this presentation. Again, we're going to have a Q&A towards the end, but please submit your questions using not the chat box, but the Q&A box that you see on the top of your screen. So you can start, populating that Q&A box with your questions, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. So again, thanks very much, Sunil. Next slides, we continue on the agenda and go to the second presentation, which is going to be presented by Jasper Evers. Jasper is a partner at Avance, and Avance is a boutique valuation firm. Jasper has been also the founder of the royaltymonetization.com sites, and obviously as the name says, it's all about converting royalties into, active non-dilutive capital, and we're going to be hearing about that. But Jasper, before being at Avance, has been with Deloitte in the Netherlands for quite a few years and has been advising companies around, deal making and financing. So he's got a lot of experience in the valuations and in deal making, financing, negotiations. So a good understanding of the drug development and of the ecosystem of the biotech. So thanks, Jasper, to talk to us about alternative way of getting some financing for small companies. So the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Happy to be here, and thanks for the invite. Indeed, so my goal today is to talk you all through royalty monetization, what it can do in life sciences and biopharma in particular. It has emerged over the last, let's say, 20 years as an additional way of financing, where it was pioneered by Royalty Pharma, which most of you may know, especially in the mature medicine space. So the marketed drugs and monetizing the royalties of those, and it has progressed into a tool that also can be used for smaller and emerging companies. So again, my goal today is to talk you through what we have seen over the last 10 years developing, and what currently is the status of the landscape for royalty financing, and how it may impact or be useful for your company. So let's go into the first slide. And let's start with what it actually is. And we start with a very basic concept of royalty financing. Let's say that in a typical situation where you have a smaller biotech that develops a new drug, let's assume that it is a phase 1-2 drug and it outlicenses it to a big pharma company, something like Novartis that Jean-Marc knows very well. So you end up with a licensing agreement between the biotech and, in this case, Novartis, where basically the rights have been transferred to Novartis to bring it to the market against typically economics, which exists, of course, of upfront payments, milestones, maybe sales milestones, and royalties down the line. Typically, that's on one asset or one product for maybe multiple indications, but the biotech may have other products that it is developing, and it may have a cash need for that as well. So again, I'm here describing the stereotype, very basic way of royalty monetization. Now, for the development of the other drugs that have not been out-licensed, there is, as always, in biotech, high financing need, and the company has several ways of meeting that financing need, which can be grant and incentives, that can be equity, and sometimes venture debt, which is a little bit difficult if you are in early stage. And over the course of the last, let's say, decade, royalty financing has become more prominent in this space, where the company may say, well, what if I sell a part or a whole of the economics that I'm expecting to get from, in this case, Novartis, and sell that to a third-party investor? And that's typically what we call a royalty aggregator. And that's a typically financially driven company that enters into a financial transaction where it buys the future economics, the green arrow, for a certain upfront amount, so the upfront capital. So the biotech may say, well, I sell you all the future economics that I get from Novartis and sell it to you, meaning the investor, for an upfront capital. So instead of raising equity, it sells the future economics of that transaction for cash now, which it can deploy to meet its financial needs. That's the very, very basic concept of what royalty financing is. So you take the future economics that you can get from one party and you sell it to another party. Of course, the investor wants to make a return as well, so it will put a discount on the number of the economics that you're expecting to get from the pharma company, Novartis in this case, and basically takes over the risk. And for that risk, it wants to get a reward as well, and that is the discount that it will apply on the future economics. So you will not get the full amount that you are expecting from Novartis, but because you want it now and not wait until the future, you can get a reduced amount in upfront now. That's the key concept. So if we now get to the next slide, Francesca. So why would a company do that? And I already touched a little bit upon that. And Deloitte and Royalty Pharma and Gibson Dunn did a survey, actually, questioning people around it, which we leveraged. So there are a few items and key benefits why people are entering into these type of transactions. The first and foremost is, especially in the last couple of years, where valuations have been down, the equity markets have been closed, the IPO windows have been closed, and has been very challenging to raise equity, which meant that even if you could raise equity, the valuations and the dilution were pretty high over the last couple of years. So the equity side of things was very expensive way of financing your company. The benefit of royalty monetization is that is non-dilutive financing. In addition, it typically does not require covenants, collateral. It does not come with any control clauses. So there are no board seats or any other control mechanisms, which means that the company taking on the financing can operate with the same cap table and the same freedom to operate, if you will, as prior to the transaction, which is quite appealing, especially also with management teams or founders that are still very involved in the business. The other thing that I want to highlight is that it can be on multiple programs, but if you go to the basic concept that I just explained, it can be a single product financing capability. And we try to illustrate that on the right side. So if you look at the biotech and it has a pipeline of multiple programs, if you would raise equity, basically you're diluting over all the three assets that the company is developing. Whereas if you do a royalty financing transaction on only the phase 3 assets on the top of the pipeline that is partnered, you're only diluting over that part of the value generating portion of your business. So the future value of the phase 2 and the phase 1-2 unpartnered assets remain intact and are not diluted as a part of this financing. So that's also a real benefit, and that's also something that makes it attractive to combine with equity financing or use. We see that with a lot of clients where royalty financing is used to reduce the financing need. So basically a mechanism to, again, control dilution or minimize dilution. And also, well, if phase 2, if one of the unpartnered assets are considered to be more attractive or have more upside potential, then that is something that you do not want to burden or dilute over time. So that is, I think, in a nutshell, what has been driving the attractiveness of royalty financing. Here we highlighted the typical outline or the makeup of the pipeline, meaning to early stage and a mid stage phase 3 asset, which is licensed. That's well, the typical profile that we see for royalty financing. Just to give you an idea, the earliest stage that we see royalty financiers being interested in monetizing part of a licensing deal is as of early phase 1. Anything prior to that is typically considered too early and too risky for a financial investor to put a royalty or a synthetic royalty on. Yep, let's move to the next slide. I touched a little bit upon it. So initially, people always assume that with royalty financing, the entirety of a licensing deal or all the economics have to be sold. But the good thing of royalty financing is that it's just as flexible as a licensing transaction, meaning that you can structure it as you like. So we have been involved in royalty financings, as I said, for the last 10 years. And I've only seen once that a company sold all of its economics. Typically, the company still wants to retain some of the economics to be able to benefit from the potential upside. And also the royalty investor likes to have the biotech still retaining some of the economics so that they have skin in the game and are still motivated to bring the partnership with the pharma to successful launch, and that they can benefit from that. So you can be flexible in what you sell, and that can be, so here, for example, we have you selling 10% of the development milestones and 25% of the royalties, but it can be modular. So that can go from, let's say, 10 to 100% of both of those items. So you can tailor it as you like. I think also good to bear in mind is that you can say, well, some of the sale or development milestones or upcoming milestones we keep out of the scope of the royalty financing. For instance, if you have VCs on board that already have calculated with some near-term milestones coming in, or they're in the budget, or they've communicated to the market, for instance, you can say, well, we keep those out of the scope and we just sell a little bit more of milestone 3 and 4, for instance, or a little bit more of the back-end royalties. And typically, the royalties is where the royalty investors have the most interest in. So yeah, just this slide is aimed to make you aware that you can tailor it as you like. Then there, next to the basic royalty concept that I just mentioned, you may have seen the term synthetic royalty. And the synthetic royalty is basically a new royalty that you put on an unpartnered asset. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the traditional one is you already have a licensing deal in place and you are selling the future economic on that already existing agreement to an investor. In the case of synthetic royalties, you create an actual new economic stream on a typically a drug product. So if you say, well, we have an unpartnered product, but we are launching it ourselves. So one of our clients is currently doing that, but we are looking for funding to finance the successful launch of that new drug. We don't have any partner. We just bring it to the market ourselves. What you can then do is create a synthetic royalty, basically selling a portion of your future revenue to these royalty aggregators. And they will say, well, we want a, let's say, 4 to 7 or 8% royalty on the future sales of your product. And in return, we give you now typically somewhere between 50 and 150 million upfront to finance your launch and make it a successful product. So that's the key distinction between a traditional and a synthetic royalty. Where it, of course, as always with financial engineering gets complicated is if you have already partnered assets and you have unpartnered assets, and you start talking to a royalty aggregator, they may ask for both. So they may say, well, we want to have a portion of your already partnered products, but we also want to put a synthetic royalty on your unpartnered products. And then you get a mix. And that's something that then becomes complicated. At the same time, these investors are looking to diversify their risk, and that's for them a way of doing so. So basically, these two ways of royalty financing are all under the header of royalty financing, and you may come across both types in one transaction. Next one. Yeah, here we put together some examples of those type of deals for you to take a look at. The Zoma one is interesting. We did that ourselves, and that was a nice one because it's with BioInvent with a Takeda drug. It's a relatively small ticket size in the royalty financing space, but it was an early stage drug, and it was a traditional royalty. Royalty Pharma moves more and more into the synthetic royalty space, and also into higher ticket sizes. What you also may have noticed in the headlines that have been coming thick and fast over the last few months. We will dive into the landscape of royalty financing in the next slides, but 2025 was a record year in terms of transaction values. And the thing that I want to mention there is that that number is mainly made up out of the big royalty transactions done by large players as Royalty Pharma, Blackstone, and institutional investors, typically on mature products or on transactions with large pharma, and typically they are around synthetic royalties. Next one. So, as I mentioned, we see the concept of royalty financing being on the rise. On the left side, you see the 2.2x in royalty financing in the years between 2015 and 2020. That is royalty in general, so that also is including music royalties, etc. The middle graph, you see a upward trend in the biopharma royalty financing. And again, that still includes also the large ticket size on the synthetic royalty sides. If you then look at the total industry funding over the years 2020 till 24, you see that royalty financing in itself only still accounts for 9%, which is relatively small, but still rising rapidly. And for the reasons we just mentioned, we see that there's more and more interest. So that's also one of the reasons that we launched the royaltymonetization.com website, as we got a lot of questions around this topic. But we see that there is interest from both large to mid-sized pharma, which use it as a de-risking tool for their development pipeline. But also we see more interest from institutional investors, typically large pension funds or mutual funds, insurance companies that are currently backing private debt and private equity funds that are looking for more yield and see royalty financing in biopharma as one of their growth areas. And I think the good news there is that even from our limited scope, we are involved in the setting up of 2 new royalty funds for life sciences in Europe alone. And typically royalty financing currently is a US phenomenon. They pioneered it, and there it's more common. And we saw over the last 2-3 years more interest from those funds in European deals. But we also now see more the emergence of Europe-focused royalty deals, royalty funds being created, which I think is a good development. Next slide. Yeah, that's a little bit of summary of what I just explained. So I'm a little bit ahead of myself. Quite a number of executives look at royalty financing to use for their financing needs. That's a good number. The average deal size, again, I want to highlight that with specific players, you can go also earlier stage, as I mentioned, as of phase 1. And we have been working on deals which were 5 to 7.5 million initial ticket size, which is very small, up to 100 million plus, which are more on the mature product side. So the number here of average deal size should not put you off saying, well, we don't need that much of money. I would say as of 7 to 10 million ticket size, royalty financiers are still interested in exploring what can be done. There are various players in the market. I think, well, there was a little bit too much to list them all, but there are, to our knowledge, there are around 25 to 30 active funds in this space, and as I said, new ones are being created as we speak. Royalty Pharma is the largest by far and also the oldest, and they do very large ticket size. They have very low cost of capital, typically on mature products. Although you see them going more early stage and financing also phase 3 clinical trials, for instance, and partnering with some research centers. So they are moving more early stage to get the higher yields, because the more risk, the higher return they can expect. Then you have Healthcare Royalty Partners, which is also a very well-known US player. They've been acquired by KKR for the reasons I just mentioned. So the big institutions are also looking to get the returns out of this niche. Blackstone has been in the space also for quite some time, typically also for larger deals as a phase 3. Then Zoma is one of our clients, and they are very flexible, pragmatic, but they can go as early as phase 1. So that is, I think, of interest. And Ligand is a listed company that also acquires royalties, typically as of late phase 2 and onwards. So Ligand, you should think about as being in between Zoma and Healthcare Royalty Partners in terms of stage and ticket size. In terms of the trends that we're seeing, as I mentioned, big pharma is getting more interested, and that is big pharma, but also mid-sized pharma. We have some active discussions where they basically looking to de-risk some of their late-stage drug development programs. Europe is becoming more interesting for royalty players, for new ones, but also for the US ones. What we also see is that the larger players are in a fierce competition for the right deals, and that means that their returns are under pressure. And in order to be able to do deals that are in earlier development stage, so pre-approval, mid-phase 3, we are currently working on some hybrid structures where they say, well, we give you upfront now until approval. So that may be for a term of maybe 1.5 to 2 years. For that term, it will be a debt. So think about it as a sort of a venture debt that then will convert into a royalty right as of approval. Well, these type of ways of structuring a deal makes it even more complex, but also gives you an idea that with the right level of creativity, you may be able to persuade some of these players to get in a little bit more early, take a little bit more risk, but still manage their mandate by using a hybrid between royalty financing and debt. As I mentioned, given that our new investors entering this space, we expect that the terms are also should improve, let's say, over time, depending, of course, on the various risk levels. Next slide. Next to the hybrid version, there are also conditional and contingent royalty deals. Again, these investors are looking to finance, again, the lowest risk possible. And of course, drug development is a very risky business. So you're always looking for financing need and trying, just as a licensing deal, to divide the risk between the two parties. And one of the ways of doing that is that even though the core concept of royalty financing is getting upfront cash now in return for future uncertain economics, we see more and more deals where the overall financing commitment is higher, but that it is split between an upfront component and then installments over time, depending on approval, phase 2 success, phase 3 success, or sometimes even market adoption or initial sales milestones. So these are structures that also may help you get a larger financial commitment from these players whilst meeting their risk requirements, risk management requirements. And there are in those agreements various mechanisms to make sure that the investors get their right results, like ratchet provisions, meaning that they can get, depending on how the drug is performing on the market, higher or lower royalty rates. There may be buyout options or other features in there just to make sure that both parties keep the right level of flexibility. The hybrid version I already mentioned. So I think we can go to the next one. One element that we come across and we actively advise on is that the mechanism of royalty financing can be done in parallel with actually striking your first licensing deal or a licensing deal. So as we speak, we are working on a licensing deal between a Swiss biotech and a mid-size pharma company. And although the terms of the agreement are reasonable, the biotech needs more cash to finance its other programs in the pipeline. So the upfront of the licensing deal is basically too small to fund all the needs that the company has. So they can either raise additional equity on the basis of this licensing deal, which is quite expensive, or and that's what we're currently doing, is we already started conversations with royalty financiers and shared with them the draft deal that we are currently working on and said, well, if we are able to up the downstream royalties of this deal, would you be interested in selling a portion of those downstream royalties for upfront cash now? And that's where we're moving towards. And basically what you then do, in this case, we are doubling the upfront, essentially on the same deal. And with that, the company can meet its financing needs. So it becomes a little bit complex because you have to manage two sides, but at the same time, towards your board and investors, you can present an overall financing solution that is geared towards the licensing deal. So the points that you need to pay attention to in such a process is that you keep the relationship open and transparent with both sides. Not that transparent, but at least make the licensee aware that you have the flexibility and the intention of selling some of the downstream royalties, that you're able to do that. Also to make sure that the overall terms of the agreement suit what the royalty investor wants. And then basically make sure that the timing of both transactions work in tandem so that you can meet your financing objectives. And Genfit has done that recently with healthcare royalty partners, and we saw that in other cases as well. For now, let's knock on wood, but it seems to work pretty well. But it requires some planning and some additional process management to pull this off. But for the company, it would be ideal because they would prevent raising additional equity whilst bringing the pipeline forward. Next one. Yeah, so I think now we get to sort of boring slides, but still I think important from a practical sense is some items to think about if you think, well, royalty financing is something for our company to consider, and it may be a good fit for our strategic goals. It's something that we run into over the last couple of years, and that we encourage you to think about. As always, it starts with early strategic planning. So what are we aiming for? How would that look like? And how would royalty monetization fit into this? Would that already be in the licensing stage in parallel, as we just talked about? Maybe afterwards, maybe we are looking at synthetics, or we just going for equity with the current partner. So just an overall strategic planning is always the foundation you need to have any discussion. Of course, the IP and all the agreements that form the basis of any royalty financing transaction should be robust, and it's always helpful to have a pre-check by legal counsel or financial counsel just to calculate what is it worth, and is the current agreement suitable for monetization. That if not, then that saves you a lot of time and effort. Then also it's worthwhile exploring on which type of royalty financers would fit your overall strategic goals. Some of the aggregators are very transactional. Other parties are more long-term and are willing to deploy capital over time, have more flexibility. So as always with deal making, it also is what type of counterparty suits your company and your management team best. And last but not least, I think it's very important also to float these ideas with your board, licensees, and other stakeholders prior to actually entering into those discussions. We have come to some roadblocks in the past where people were surprised and are not supportive, which is a shame for all parties involved. Next one. Some attention points that typically always come up. So the most important thing is that the future economics in your licensing transaction, which are typically called buy a box, does not equal the amount of money you can get from an investor. So they will use discounts for the future royalties, for the current development risk, for market risk, etc. So be aware of that and do some calculation or ask somebody to calculate that for you, that you have a realistic number of what the actual value and ticket size is that your current economics can justify. Cost of capital is something that you should weigh against your equity, but also if you do a little bit of research, you can see what the cost of capital of the royalty investors are, so you can then assess what suits your current setup and what would be digestible for your stakeholders. If you sell something that people think is valuable, that has some psychology to it. So typically it helps to cap the upside or have buyback provisions in there, just in case that the product is as successful as you think it is, that you do not miss out. At the same time, the flip side of that, of course, is that there's always risk in a partner program. And if you're dealing with very large companies like Sanofi or Novo, and there's a new management team and your program may or may not be in the new strategy, there's always also risk on your partnered asset, which you may want to shift to another investor just to make sure or hedge your bets. So be aware of that. And then maybe this presentation already gave you an idea. There is some complexity in these type of deals, just from a financial and legal perspective, and therefore, 6 to 12 months is typically what you should account for in terms of preparing and negotiating and closing such a transaction. and I think it's somewhere in here in these slides, but typically when you think you're there, tax and legal may cause some delays because the recognition of the proceeds from such a transaction may differ from country to country and may differ under various tax treaties. So that is something also to take a look at relatively early so that you can fit that timeline. Let me stop here, and I hope this was insightful and give you a little bit of an idea of how the royalty financing landscapes look like. And well, happy to take your questions.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jasper. Thank you for that great presentation. Please continue to populate the Q&A or the chat. It looks like some people have difficulties to find the Q&A box, but if you can't find it, just place your question in the chat, and then I can actually raise your points to the speakers. Obviously, I mean, I'm going to start with Sunil. Thank you again for that presentation. The obvious questions that people are coming up is, how do we, contact these sovereign funds? What is the best approach? Would these sovereign funds invest only in companies that are kind of already in their countries? Because at the end of the day, they are managing national savings, as you said. So is their interest only for something that would satisfy their regions or countries, or would they invest and actively invest or maybe passively invest in some other companies that are outside of their national arena?
Thanks, Jean-Marc. That's a good question. I think if we go back to kind of the first slide that I presented, I think it really depends on the mandate of the particular sovereign wealth fund. So, each one, I guess each of these funds have different pockets of capital and obviously different objectives. So, some of the sovereigns will have pockets of capital that are more for financial investments. Like for example, if you take ADQ has a vertical called Lunate, for example, which is more of a kind of a asset allocation company and a financial investor. And so they will, have different verticals that invest in, say, private equity funds, public equities, and they will also potentially have a pocket of capital for VC investing. And so maybe, some of the earlier stage kind of biotechs may fit that pocket. So that could be an example. If you look at Mubadala, for example, they have Mubadala Capital, which acts as almost like a private equity. So there are some pockets of capital that are more, I guess, that look more like private equity or call it kind of hedge fund type capital. And then there's other like I mentioned, strategic platforms. So take Arcera as an example, take, Lifeair in Saudi. And each of these strategic platforms may have different mandates. So, Lifeair, which I mentioned in Saudi, has a primary focus on national resilience, and they'd be very much interested on building capability around kind of local, securing local capabilities in times of crisis or for the long-term health of the population. Our platform, for example, at Arcera, we have both we have a dual national mandate, but we also have a kind of a more international mandate. So if you look at our business, we're bringing medicines to patients in over 120 countries around the globe. So we're very much interested in bringing innovation to our markets, not only the UAE, but Mexico, Brazil, Egypt, South Africa, Ukraine, Saudi, UAE. So we're kind of, we have a full BD capability, and we're looking for partnerships globally. I'll give you an example. We recently partnered with a Korean biotech developing a phase 3 molecule for Alzheimer's. And so, you know, we license this molecule not only for the Middle East, but all of our regions. So I guess the short answer, Jean-Marc, you might have another question, but the short answer is it really depends kind of on the mandate of that particular sovereign.
But if I understand, Arcera is a kind of Abu Dhabi company, and clearly it's going to be a multinational kind of companies, but it's an Abu Dhabi company. Now, I think the questions comes as, you know, if I'm a Swiss biotech or a European biotech, how do
Yes.
I manage to get some funding from those sovereign funds? And if I understand what you're saying is that yes, those sovereign funds may have pocket of financing and maybe co-investing with private equity or behaving like private equity, which means if I translate that this kind of long horizon that you were talking about, like you were talking about objective for 2045, you know, which everybody would like to have investors coming in for long term. If you're getting some private equity money, in which maybe there is some sovereign funds investment, it's still going to be like the typical private equity for more short-term horizon. Is that the way as well, that pocket of investment would be really for short term?
I mean, again, I think Jean-Marc, the answer is it depends, unfortunately. So, for example, if you speak to I think the best advice would be to talk to as many people in the ecosystem as possible and build a network, because you may find that, you know, there's a certain constituent in the country that's very interested in developing an early stage molecule, but in the country. So, for example, they'd be very interested in working with a Swiss biotech on setting up in-country capabilities, on helping them set up in-country capabilities to do preclinical, and let's say clinical development, you know, in the countries, because it helps bring a capability to the country, and that particular entity can help sort of work with the Swiss biotech on where are the pockets of capital in the country that can help fund that development. Then there will be other companies that are more mature, let's say like ourselves, which have a very clear strategy, and we sort of know what we're trying to do, and the Swiss biotech may have a mandate that very much connects with our strategy, or may have a mandate that doesn't connect with our strategy. So again, it really depends on the mandate and the objective of that particular sovereign wealth fund, but not only the sovereign wealth fund, but the ecosystem around it. So again, it might not be that sovereign wealth fund that makes the investment. It might be a constituent in the ecosystem that could provide that funding.
Yeah, it could be direct or most likely more indirect. But basically, as a company, we would need to find an angle that would attract that kind of funding because of some activities that would be run kind of in the countries, or working on an indication that's going to be also high incidence or prevalence in that part of the world. So
Yeah, that would definitely be an advantage when you're having a conversation with one of these sovereigns on if there's a way that brings local capabilities, local innovation, or addresses, let's say, a particular rare disease that's prevalent in the region, or that can leverage, for example, the genome program, you know, those kinds of conversations, or as an advanced cell and gene therapy. You know, those kinds of conversations, I think, have a high touch point with some of the sovereign funds and also the ecosystem around them.
So to the question I see from Sarah, how best to secure sovereign wealth funding, and what sort of stage of types of company are most interested of such investment? I think it's actually quite large, and it depends whether this is going to be direct or indirect.
Yeah.
And there is another questions more or less in that directions from Natalia, asking whether Arcera would be most interested in products approved in other parts of the world, or would have interest in partnership, in collaboration with early stage or preclinical assets.
Yeah.
That's the same as well, huh?
Yeah, no, so I think the answer to that is we're definitely interested in partnering with global companies. We have a track record of having done that, as I mentioned. We've partnered with biotechs in the US, in Europe, in Asia. We're now obviously looking towards China quite heavily. So we're definitely interested. The stage of the business where we're at, we've been mainly, given our strategy, mainly focus on, let's say, innovative products that have, say, been already approved or registered, let's say, in one country, but not registered in our country. So we act as like a bridge to registering and bringing those medicines to patients through our commercial and regulatory platform. We've started to dip our toes a bit into late stage phase 3 partnerships, like the one in Korea I mentioned to you, which is in a phase 3 global trial. So we've started to also move a little bit down the value chain. We're not yet at the point where, we've yet to work with, kind of, let's say, preclinical or phase 1, phase 2 type assets. I think that's something that, is in our mission as we grow as a company. Or the other idea that could happen is, we have an M&A mandate, so we could acquire a platform that has innovation around it, either late stage or a pipeline of early stage products in it. So that's also something that's in our kind of agenda.
And the question that just arrived from Hadrian, whether sovereign funds or platforms such as Arcera limit to working with a private company, or can they also work with listed companies? So is there any difference? I mean, is
No
is there-
difference. I mean, no, we've actually worked with both. We're quite, I mean, for us, it doesn't matter, how that company is financed, whether it's through public or private markets. So we've worked with, so we're agnostic to the type of company. We're more interested in the therapeutic area, in the product, whether it fits our strategy, whether it can be launched into our markets, for example. Those are the parameters that we look at.
Mhm. Okay, well, thanks for that. Let me jump a bit on the other presentation and to the audience, keep asking your questions. We can go back to Sunil if there's some more questions for Sunil. Jasper, I mean, thanks for the presentation. I mean, one of the questions that come to my mind is when you talk about or simultaneous licensing and royalty monetization. I mean, how really frequent is that? Because it's complex enough to do a licensing agreement, and usually it's quite competitive. If you need to have additional parties, willing to also do a due diligence on the assets, that sounds extremely complicated to me, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you have the option not to do it, then of course that would be preferred. We've seen that. So the reason for mentioning it is that we've done it once a couple of years ago, and that for us was a sort of something unique. And now we're working on 2 projects actually, as we speak, at the same time, trying to do the same. And so we see more companies looking into this and trying to accomplish this. But you're correct, it is challenging. And if you do something on the one side, you have to inform, of course, also the other side. But my experience so far is that once you are at a stage that you aligned on most of the terms, let's say the upfront and the milestones, and you have clarity on the rest of the fundamental agreement, that is a point where you can start talking to the royalty investors and basically negotiate a mandate from them on what portion would you like to have and how would that look like, so that you know what you have to do on the other side. So it's not continuous back and forth, but you're working within a framework that you agreed on the other side. But yeah, it is it is hard work.
Okay. A question from Bob, inquiring whether these royalty companies are willing to entertain synthetic royalty deals for early stage companies, say phase 1B, 2A, and if so, how large could the funding be? 10 million, 50 million more?
So it could be, it's very rare. Typically, in that early stage, they would be looking for an existing royalty deal and then adding a synthetic on such a program to it. Having said that, if the science is really exciting and the market is also compelling, so it could be towards a blockbuster market share, and you have one or two credible investors in your cap table that buy into that thesis, then it's worthwhile having that conversation. Yeah.
There were also questions from, let me just check that. A question from Julio asking more about industry standard discount rate used in the royalty monetization and obviously based maybe on the phase of the assets.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That is something that we know from some companies, which they don't like us to share. But just as a ballpark, if you are marketed and you're talking to the large players, you have to think around 9 to 10% discount. If you go phase 2 and then let's say privately funded aggregators, then you're moving towards, or one of the stock listed ones like Ligand, etc. You have to think around 15 to 17%. And if you go earlier, phase 1, 2, then you're looking at north of 20%.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that gives you an idea. But of course, as Sunil always says, the answer is it depends. If you're in a let's say a very challenging CNS market, the discount may be higher because of the underlying risk of the asset itself, of course. But that's the discount used for the funds to create their returns.
Another question actually coming from Rashid about the guarantee. I mean, you mentioned that the investors wants to protect themselves. We understand, and you may be talking about a traditional royalty, and suddenly they ask you to also add synthetic royalties on the top of it. So Rashid was asking about what are the guarantees that the investor is taking to be paid down the road for their return of investment.
Well, that's also a key differentiator between the royalty aggregators, and that has to do with also the discount that we just discussed. So if you get to a party with a very low discount, they want to have more guarantees. If you have aggregators that use a higher discount, of course, they get less guarantees. So, for instance, if you go to Zoma, which I can talk about, they will have no collateral and no guarantees, no control. So it's truly their risk, but you pay a higher discount rate for that as well. And they are typically not keen on capping their upside because they go in very early. If you go later stage and to larger larger funds that are phase 3 or marketed products, they typically looking for some minimum guaranteed royalties, for instance, or that they get paid from the first sale, just the aggregate sales amount, and then the royalty. So they would be looking for a little bit more of guarantees, but it's also a matter of negotiation. They will ask for everything. And if you have enough interest, you can negotiate some of those guarantees away.
Another question that I was wondering, I mean, you mentioned about big pharma adopting also royalty monetization for portfolio. So I suspect you were talking about big pharma basically striking synthetic royalties deals with, royalty companies.
Yep.
But I was wondering, how frequently is it in your initial scheme for a biotech to actually approach the licensee to see whether they will be also prepared to reduce their royalty stream or eliminate the royalty stream and pay them a lump sum, basically be in competition with these royalty pharma, provided the licensee sees maybe a bigger big opportunity than initially when they license the asset.
Absolutely. That is something that is the biggest competition of any royalty aggregator is the actual licensee. And if the pharma is excited about the program and they see the opportunity, then some companies do not want to discuss with the licensee because they say, well, then we show that we are financing need, etc. So we just want to strike a deal with the outside party. But we've seen multiple times, more than 10 times, that the actual pharma said, well, we want to buy it. And of course, their cost of capital is lower and their expectations are higher and they have better data on the actual underlying risk. So it's absolutely something to consider.
Laurence is asking you questions on how do you deal with termination at sole discretion by licensee in your royalty fundings agreement?
Well, that is always a risk, and typically how that is dealt with is that then the royalty financer effectively gets a synthetic royalty on the asset once it is returned to the biotech. Yeah. But that's a risk the financer has to take, or is not willing to take. But if they take it, then that's the way that they typically manage that.
And Adrien is asking a very specific questions. If a company, one of its assets, at a different point in time, for example, when various therapeutic areas are not the same level of maturity, how would you suggest to approach royalty financing there? Wait, all therapeutic areas are mature enough, phase 3, for example, or do it individually over time as deals are done one TA area after another? So doing it sequentially or doing it kind of later as a pool?
Right. Well, it depends on your cash need, is the simple answer, right? So if you need the money, then you maybe
no choice.
forced, right. You may be forced to go early. If you say, well, the maximum result would be, waiting to the right stage and then enter into those agreements. Typically, what we see if you have one lead asset that is eligible for financing, and you discuss the pipeline, typically the financer will say, well, let's do this one first, but have a sort of a framework agreement that if the other ones get to a certain stage, we have a first option right, just as licensing, or we can add it to our deal and that it gets more of an automatic deal. So there are ways to already pre-structure it, or you can say, I want to maximize, and then it's better to go sequential one by one as it matures. But in my experience, it's typically more driven by the cash need of the company than having the luxury of getting to the right moment.
Okay, Thank you. And there were comments from jumping back on kind of sovereign wealth funds. For a comment from Andras mentioning that those funds appear to be also investors in big companies like Galderma and Credit Suisse. I mean, they are investors like any investors, and they can actually, and some of those companies actually are also in the hands of private equity. And I suspect whether this is directly a fund investing in this company or again through this joint investment with private equity firm, I don't know.
Yeah, that's right, Jean-Marc. I think they're quite flexible in terms of how they deploy capital. They can take direct stakes in listed companies, or they can, they take investments in private equity funds that then acquire life science companies, or sometimes they actually co-invest with private equity in taking, companies private. We've also seen that kind of model. And then also, because I'm just going back, you mentioned around, are they only sort of private equity type investors? Some of those sovereign funds, like I mentioned, like let's say Lunate, for example, has also a pocket for early stage investing and call it VC capital. And more they're starting, they may not have all of the in-house capabilities around biotech investing because it's quite, it's scientific, it requires knowledge, etc. But they're slowly trying to build some of those capabilities. So you may see them, dipping their toes into biotech investments as well over time.
But at the end of the day, there aren't so many. I mean, we hear more about, the sovereign funds in the Gulf. I mean, we hear about Canada, China, Norway, definitely. I mean, the Norwegian, and all of them are actually investing as well in the healthcare. I mean, I hear more on Singapore and the Gulf, but I just don't know about the Norwegians and maybe
the Norwegians. I
Chinese.
think they invest more kind of in maybe they take stakes in listed companies as institutional investors. But yeah, I've seen, a lot of the investments is coming out of the Gulf, Singapore, as you mentioned, and the Canadians as well.
Just going through my list. Questions from Francesca. How VC firms invested in a biotech early stage like the royalty monetization scheme? Francesca, you can express yourself because your mic can be open.
So Jasper, the question is related to, you have a biotech. Biotech has been funded by VC firms, and then you said, okay, guys, I want more. They are not happy to bridge or whatever. Is there any opening from VC side to this royalty monetization scheme?
Yeah, so typically they are quite happy to entertain it if they're in the board. Depends, of course, a little bit on the structure and where they are in their fund life, etc. And sometimes they just want to fund because they want to put more money in and get the yield if the company is doing well. But at the same time, it's also for them non-dilutive. And that is also something they like. So what we've seen is VCs in the board are typically supportive of these mechanisms. Besides that, we also have been working over the last couple of years with VCs that are approaching us and say, hey, can you help us monetize these licensing deals? Because they are at their fund life, for instance, and they want to show their returns to the investors. And they are basically looking to bring in more returns on their capital before actually able to exit. So also VC funds are currently looking at their portfolios on what can be monetized to optimize their funds. So both for their portfolio companies as for themselves, they see it as a useful tool. The only thing, of course, is they are keenly looking at what the cost of capital is, and if that's less than theirs, they're pretty much happy. If it's equal, then you may get into a discussion of maybe we want to do it ourselves or do it half-half or something along those lines. But yeah, generally the reception is positive.
To the audience, any more questions? Feel free to raise them now.
Maybe another question for Sunil. You mentioned that Arcera is looking for 2 different therapeutic areas. Maybe you want to give an idea to the audience, what kind of therapeutic areas are you interested in?
Sure. Thanks, Francesca. I mean, if you look at kind of our business today, it's broadly spread, as I mentioned, across many countries. So today our portfolio is, I'd say, heavily weighted to established medicines in a wide range of therapeutic areas. As we go forward and we look to sort of bring more innovation into the portfolio, we've kind of circled around 3 or 4 therapeutic areas. Some of these will be obviously no surprise. Oncology, which is obviously a big is one of the biggest therapeutic areas in terms of market size. Cardiometabolism, so anything around kind of diabetes or cardiovascular disease, etc. Neuroscience, so let's say both psychiatric disorders, neurodegenerative disorders, and then I'd say the broader kind of rare disease space we're looking at. So I'd say those are sort of the key therapeutic areas.
The other question I wanted to ask you, Sunil, is I mean, you listed at least 3 sovereign wealth funds in Abu Dhabi. Are they actually working kind of together, or are they kind of in competition for the investment?
No, I'd say, I mean, they're independently sort of run. So they each have their own strategic objectives. So they don't necessarily work in competition. There could be some instances where there are some crossovers. So for example, Mubadala owns hospitals, so does the ADQ platform. In life sciences, we tend to have, I'd say, sort of different strategic objectives, so we don't necessarily cross over. But at the end of the day, we're all part of the same family. So you'll never see us competing against the other in an open auction. That'll never happen. We'll always be seen as one partner. If one pocket of capital or one platform is better suited to invest in that particular idea, then the other one would step aside. So we should all, I guess in Abu Dhabi at least, be seen as one family.
Yeah. At the end, the ultimate
The money
objective
goes
is
to
the
the
same.
country. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Very good. I think if there is no more questions, I think we can. Thanks again, our 2 speakers. Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Jasper. And thank you to the audience to have joined this webinar. The Swiss HLG is planning to have maybe another webinar sometime this year, maybe towards the autumn. Again, as Francesca mentioned, our next big event is for our flagship conference in Montreux. So, feel free to register to the conference. The topic is really very actual at the moment. We are living in a very fragmented world and becoming challenging for our industry to partner or to actually continue the development of our companies. So thank you very much again for the presentations and for your participation to this webinar. And we say goodbye and to the next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.